Hello creeps! Andy here. I recently got a comment on one of my videos of somebody saying that they don't even read horror books, but they still watch my channel and they prefer other genres. And so first of all, thank you. I mean, thank you to anybody who watches my videos. I appreciate every single one of you. But it gave me an idea of making a video of just my favorite authors in general, excluding all of my horror favorites. So these are either my favorite authors of all time, or some of them are just my favorite books. And here we go. I'm going to give you a little synopsis of each one, or talk about the writer, or talk about how the book inspired me in some way. And I think this will be an interesting video. So here we go. No surprise here. The very first person that I would mention would be, of course, Kurt Vonnegut. He is one of, if not my favorite author of all time at the current moment. I absolutely love his writing style. It's weird, it's bizarre, it's strange, and it's so much fun. He has a lot of dark humor in his books, as well as just weird things happen. This one is Slaughterhouse-Five. This is an anti-war book. It's about the bombing in Dresden in World War II. It is autobiographical in a way. Sorry, my dog's panting in the corner if you can hear him, but it is autobiographical because it is about somebody who's been a prisoner of war, and Kurt Vonnegut himself was a prisoner of war, but it's not about him. And the narrator is actually, well, it goes through different phases of his life, and it also talks about aliens, and everything is just very strange, but it all comes back around and it all has meaning. And it's just, I don't know if I said it already, but it's an anti-war book. Fantastic read. The reason why Kurt Vonnegut and this book specifically inspired me is it made me approach literature in just a different way than I never have before. It really made me more adventurous with my own writing, and it made me realize that there are no rules in literature, or at least if there are, you can bend them as much as you can before breaking them. And that's something that this book definitely does. His work just inspires me beyond maybe any writer ever. He really did change the way that I think about literature, that I read books, and that I write myself. I also really loved Mother Night by him. That's a book that I read this year. I also loved Timequake. I mean, Cat's Cradle is a trip to read. Even his Look at the Birdie book of short stories. Every book that I've read from him, I've enjoyed, I'd love, and I just respect him, and I love his work so much. So that is one of my favorite writers. The next is Ray Bradbury. This particular book is just one more for the road. It's just a book of short stories, but I mean, he has countless other books that I've read and also loved. I love The Illustrated Man and The Martian Chronicles. I read both of those this year. Those are definitely more on the sci-fi. This is just kind of a book of short stories, and I don't know that it necessarily fits into any specific genre. My favorites from him are his more horror-leaning books, like The October Country. That is my absolute favorite. They're just a bunch of short stories that definitely feel related to Halloween, like vampires and things like that. He also wrote Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is definitely a mixture of sci-fi and horror, I would say. So yeah, he's kind of all over the place, although most people just see him as a science fiction writer, but still one of my favorites. Next up, it's not that I specifically love Sophocles, but this book is more of a representation of Greek mythologies. I mean, if we are really to think about horror and where horror started, I am convinced it is with Greek tragedies. These books are so vile at times, and like the most horrendous things happen, and they truly are more disturbing than like 90% of books that are published nowadays. This one is just the Oedipus cycle, so it's just you know, the Oedipus stories and Antigone, but I really do love any Greek mythology. I don't know that there's one Greek tragedy that I've read and it hasn't struck me in a way that no other book has. I took a Greek and Roman mythology class, as well as in the same semester a John Milton Paradise Lost class, and it inspired my writing so much with like that personification of those what do you call them? Abstract nouns. I think actually, I don't know if you guys know this, I don't really talk about it that much, but I do have my stories linked below if you do want to listen to them. And I think it was Dressed for Her Own Funeral that I wrote while taking my Greek and Roman mythology class. And I just love Greek mythology so much. It's such an inspiration, and it really does feel like a unique read, even though these stories have been retold or are inspired by so many things that we read nowadays or watch. This one, I always go back to either Oedipus Rex or Antigone. Those are ones that I revisit. I try to revisit them like once a year. The next one I feel like is maybe kind of cheating, and a few of these I do refer to as horror books even though they're not, and this one is Dante's Inferno. This is a part of Dante's Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatory, Paradise, I think, but I'm just specifically referring to Inferno. This is a book about Dante being led down the rings of hell by Virgil, and I gotta tell ya, it's one of the darker books I've ever read, so I do consider it a horror book, even though I know it's in the literary canon. I don't think that anybody else sees it that way, but for Dante to be able to envision just horrendous things and punishment and torture happening to people after people after people, it's mind-blowing. There's a lot of dark stuff in here, and it is, I think, one of the best things that has ever graced this earth as far as literature is concerned. I love Dante's Inferno. I know it can be a lot, especially when in reference to names, so definitely getting like a portable Dante would be the best option if you're gonna go this route. Oh, I've talked about this in a million videos, but I'm just gonna reiterate it here. The thing that's so disturbing about this is it's not people saying like, oh, I murdered someone and now I ended up in hell. It's like, oh, I stole a piece of bread because I was hungry and now I'm burning in eternal flame forever. I don't know how his brain came up with all of that. The next I also feel like is a little bit cheating because it's Bret Easton Ellis. He does obviously have horror books like The Shards and American Psycho, which are fantastic, but I guess Less Than Zero specifically, it's not a horror book at all, and it is rather disturbing. I just think that Bret Easton Ellis's writing style is so unique and interesting, and I also think the nihilism within his books is just unparalleled. Like, you just can't get more nihilistic than Bret Easton Ellis. I mean, you probably can, but for as enjoyable as the books are, they do really hit you. This book is about a group of kids in LA, and there is a character that's mentioned in here that is mentioned in American Psycho, but they're not related. And the way that I see Less Than Zero, it's like, when you read American Psycho, you think, who could end up like this? And then you read Less Than Zero and you're like, that's who ends up like that. And it's just a bunch of kids in LA. They're just like rich, never have to work for anything kids, and their parents don't really care for them. No one really cares about them. It's really sad. It honestly made me thankful that I did not grow up with a lot of money, but it is a fantastic read. So I love that, and I love Bret Easton Ellis. Kind of switching lanes here. This one may seem a little bit random, but this is Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Now, the reason I love Jane Eyre so much is because at first I went to college for American Sign Language interpreting, and I transferred to university to continue my degree in deaf studies. However, I changed my major to English with an emphasis on creative writing, because I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I was hesitant to take English classes because I was worried that it was just going to be a bunch of stuff I didn't want to read. You know, I was really into like Stephen King and Chuck Palahniuk and, you know, writers that probably aren't considered to be in the literary canon as far as college is concerned. And so I ended up switching my major. Maybe one day I'll tell you why. It's actually kind of a funny story. But this was the first full-length novel I read in college as an English student. And there is so much creepy, supernatural, weird, dark horror elements in this book that maybe the average person wouldn't think about. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that reading this book, it made me realize like, oh, I am where I'm supposed to be. You can definitely find horror elements in so much of different genres of literature, even in classic literature. And I think Jane Eyre is such a good example of this. It's about a girl named Jane Eyre. She grows up and you kind of get to see her life and how she was an orphan and how she's had it hard. She becomes a governess and she falls in love with her boss, Mr. Rochester. But there's some creepy, dark things that come out. I don't want to give too much away, but I absolutely adored this. I went into it being like, oh, this is a romance. I don't want to read a romance. And by the end, I was just blown away. I loved every second, and I ate my words because it is not just a romance. There's definitely creepy stuff in here, and I adore this book. And it was just one of those books that made me realize like, oh, I'm in the right place. And yeah, it will always hold a special place in my heart because of that. This one might be a little bit kind of cheating too, but this is Donald Ray Pollock's The Devil All the Time. I always group this into a disturbing horror book in any of my videos, and it's not even a horror book, it's just fiction, but it really is rough to read. It's hard to get through, and Donald Ray Pollock is just I think one of the best writers alive, truly. Like, this book is that good. And I've reread it so many times since reading it for the first time, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. And wow, this book just blows me away every time I read it. It's about 2 towns and all this horrific stuff that happens in there, abuse and murder and addiction and loss and grief and guilt, and so much is in this book, and it is just a messed up read. So it is definitely more on like the dark side. Not a horror book, but I always group it with horror because it just makes me feel icky in a way that honestly a horror book can't even. The next one is Chuck Palahniuk. Just in general, I went through the biggest Chuck Palahniuk phase in high school. That is all I read. I loved every single thing that he wrote. I'm not gonna lie, in recent years, I haven't loved what he's put out. I know he's coming out with a new book very soon, and so I will definitely give that one a read. The last one I can remember reading was Adjustment Day, and that book was not for me. I just thought it was an interesting choice of writing. I don't know. I just was not a fan of Adjustment Day, but I'm excited to see what he has that's coming out. I loved his older works. I love Fight Club, A Choke, Lullaby, Invisible Monster was always my favorite. What else have we got up here? Oh yeah, Damned and Doomed, Diary. Oh, Rant. Yeah. I mean, he's had a lot of great, fantastic books, but yeah, I just wanted to include Chuck Palahniuk in this because he has historically been one of my favorite writers, and I just reread Fight Club, so I kind of want to go through and reread all of those old books that I loved so much growing up. Next up, I've talked about this book a million times, The Stranger by Albert Camus. This book is just fantastic. I very much so love it. It was written by a philosopher, and so it's not, I would say, your traditional book. It's definitely more of a piece to analyze and like really dig under the surface and see what the book means to you. But it really is just like the most nihilistic approach to a character thinking about life that I can think of, and I come back and read this all the time because I just don't understand the narrator. It's one of those books where I'm just like, you are maybe the most interesting narrator of a book, and it's about this man and he just doesn't care about anything. His mom dies and all he could do is complain about the weather. He accidentally murders a man, I guess accidentally, just depending on the way that you read it, I think. And you go through his whole trial and his conviction and what happens and how he has absolutely no remorse. And it's just a wild ride. And it's honestly a book that has stuck with me since the day that I read it. I never can stop thinking about that book. And I think that's when a story, you know, like I said in one of my previous videos, it really struck a nerve with me, and I think it will always be with me. Franz Kafka is another huge influence on me. I absolutely love Franz Kafka's work. I know a lot of people know him from The Metamorphosis, but he has so many other great stories. I highly suggest like a full, complete story. And also look at this cover, it's so great. But a lot of his work is very bureaucratic, and it's about like this 9-to-5 job. I mean, even Metamorphosis is about a man who wakes up to go to work as a beetle, and so it's very odd and surrealist at times, but it also, a lot of it does have the same common themes of that just like bureaucratic, almost wasting your life doing something that you hate kind of themes in them. And I think that really inspired me reading his work, especially working jobs that I didn't want, when I'm like, I just want to be a writer, why can't I be a writer? And I think that's something that he himself experienced. I don't think that he ever became notorious for his writing when he was alive. I think it was post-mortem that he actually became a well-known writer, and I'm very thankful for that because I love Franz Kafka. The last one that I have here, this is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but honestly anything Hunter S. Thompson is so interesting to read. I also loved his Hell's Angels books, where he went and lived with the Hell's Angels for a while. His writing style is just unlike anything you've ever read before. He invented this gonzo style of writing that takes this journalistic approach, but also involves emotions as well. But he does it in such a brilliant way. I love this book and highly recommend, if you guys like the movie, to check out the book, because this book is just absolutely wild. But honestly, anything Hunter S. Thompson I love, and I just thought that he was an interesting man who led an interesting life. Anyways, those are at least the books that, you know, I went through my bookshelf and I tried to find all of my favorite books that were non-horror. I'm sure I missed a few here and there, but those are the ones that I came up with. Please feel free to leave a comment of your favorite non-horror writers below. I know that this wasn't exactly a typical video of mine, but hopefully it was still enjoyable. I'll leave a link to all these books down below so you guys can pick them up if you so desire. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys.